Today we're talking with Ned Coten. He's the current chairperson of Basketball Australia. He's led a very interesting career from a professional basketballer through every level of administration to his current role. He's got lots of great insights. Let's go have a chat. Ned Coten, thanks for joining us.
No problem, very glad to be here.
So when I was looking at your history, I really like it because it's so broad and quite interesting. And obviously, I touched on it last time we met. I'm a bit of a fanboy, really, in that as a kid, I looked up to the Perth Wildcats, being from Perth, and you were one of the, or I'd consider you one of the stars because you were in the team.
Sure.
Alongside all these amazing guys.
Yeah, that's right.
But let's start at the very start. So you're a country boy from Narrogin in WA, which is about 200 kilometres southeast of Perth.
Yeah, that's right. Very good.
What is life like growing up in Narrogin in WA? That's a long way from
yeah, look, it's a long way away, and certainly a long way from what my life looks like now. I often say to my children that just sort of trying to explain to them how different my life was growing up, to their life, not just in terms of the country versus the city, but just the whole way of life, technology, everything that we experience in life today was just totally different for me. So Narrogin's a small country town in Western Australia. Like most kids of my age, or of that era, I guess I played. I had a basketball, a football, a cricket bat, a tennis racket, and a bike, and that was my life. And so we just did. I played a lot of sport. I played a lot of football, Aussie rules, which I really enjoyed, and basketball was one of those sports, and so there was probably at an early age not a particular focus on basketball for the early years. And I still remember my very first game. It was on the bitumen courts. It was sort of when it was on a Friday night, so it's a big deal in a little country town. All the kids in the town come down, and most of them either played or watched basketball. And we played with the old outdoor wooden backboards and rubber basketballs that were sort of shiny because they'd been used so much, and I was hooked and really enjoyed it. And in that same year that I started playing, I started reffing and just got into it. And so and I guess because of my height, I was identified early as someone who might have some opportunity in the sport, and sort of that led to getting into state teams and sort of going from there. So in my when I was 16, 17, I would get up on a Saturday morning, play footy, drive to Perth, train for basketball in the afternoon, play a game of basketball at 6 o'clock, drive home, get home at sort of midnight probably, then get up in the morning and play another game of footy. So it was quite, when I look back, it was pretty interesting. I was pretty committed to both football and basketball, but obviously I was fortunate to get a scholarship to the Institute of Sport and went there, and that was sort of basketball was really it for me from then on. So you don't think you would have continued with footy if it wasn't for that Institute of Sport? Look, it was, I've considered myself to be very fortunate. I was, if I look at the talent around now in basketball, globally, but particularly in Australia, I'd look back and think there's no way that I could compete with those kids. They're huge. I'm 6'8", and I was probably about that height when I was 18. And these kids are, taller than that.
With handles.
With handles, and they can just do everything. And I was just nowhere near that level. But that was my era, and I was able to compete in that era, and it was fantastic. But I did actually go back and play one game of footy a couple of years later, which I enjoyed, but just basketball was it from then on, and I really saw that as a focal point.
So how long did you spend at the Institute of Sport?
I was there for 2 years, and so.
Was that like a full-time?
Yeah, full-time. So I was there. It was in the early years of the Institute, so we stayed in a sort of an off-site student accommodation, so with all the uni students, so you can imagine what that was like for a young guy. We were all encouraged or directed basically to have 15 hours of sort of per week of part-time work or study, which I undertook. I have to say a little bit less successfully than I would have liked, but I did that, and we had a great time. It was when you're young and we were doing something we really loved, playing sport. and it really shaped my life. I met some amazing people. I was just very fortunate to have that opportunity, and that then led on to opportunities within the NBL. It was interesting that you sort of said that that I was a star in your eyes. A few people have said that to me. I suppose certainly in my own mind I was just a guy playing basketball who worked pretty hard and had some level of success. But the guys that I played with, James Crawford, Cal Bruton, Tiny Pinder, Alan Black, Trevor Torrance, Watto, these guys, they were amazing players, and I felt very fortunate to be part of that.
Yeah, so at the end of that institute period, you go back to Perth and get picked up straight away by the Wildcats.
Yeah, I was invited to go back and invited to join, the Wildcats straight away. I mean, again, in that era, that was, we were seen very much as those. 1984. Yeah. So, and I was, I had worked very hard at the Institute of Sport. I was tall, but I wasn't that talented, so I had to work very hard, and I was a little bit burnt out. And so that first year, I went back to Perth, but I just couldn't really commit myself in the way that I wanted to. I just needed some time out, which I took. I actually did a year of rowing. So I rowed for a year and with a guy called Alex Apostolou who actually went on to go back to the Institute of Sport for rowing, and which is something that I considered for a while. And I loved rowing, had a fantastic year. But then basketball sort of, was in my blood and took back over again after that. And so that's when I had a stint back in the NBL. I actually hitchhiked over to Melbourne just to see some friends. I hadn't been back here for 2 years, and when I was here, I was picked up by Coburg Giants, who then became the North Melbourne Giants, who eventually became the Victoria Titans, and where I ended up as the CEO many years later. So it's funny how that loop sort of closes eventually. But I had that experience, and then I went back to Perth. I was in Melbourne for a year and played with the Wildcats for another couple of years. Yeah, so
sticking in that period, because obviously it's close to my heart, but that as a kid, I looked up to you guys. This was basketball in Australia in the late 80s, early 90s, especially Perth Wildcats. That's when they started to have some success as well. They did. It was... Obviously, I've got starstruck eyes looking at this sport, and it was flourishing. And I remember the news at the time saying, AFL is dead, basketball's taking over Australia, every kid wants to be a basketball player now. Just describe to me what it was like being a player in that era, and then we'll talk more about...
Yeah, look, it was fascinating. I mean, if I look back, the Wildcats were stars. There was no question about it. And basketball really captured the imagination of the Australian sporting public, and particularly in Perth. And so the team had been purchased. It was formerly owned by the WA Basketball Association, now called Basketball WA. It had been bought by Bob Williams. Bob Williams invested a lot of money, did a fantastic job of taking the team into a new venue. We went into Challenge Stadium in Perth, 4,500 seats from the old Perry Lakes, which is a fantastic. Still my favourite court to play on, the old Perry Lakes Stadium, but held 1,800 people on wooden bleacher seats, which was again great atmosphere, but obviously a lot smaller. And so Bob really took it into the modern era, that I think that was in 1987, and the team grew from there. Kerry Stokes became a co-investor and then ultimately took over the team around 1990, 91. And then eventually moved the team to the Perth Entertainment Centre, which went up to sort of 9,500 seats. So it really grew. And people often say to me, what was it about that era that made it amazing? And to me, it was sort of a bit of a perfect storm of events. It was around the time when Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and subsequently Michael Jordan were real stars in the NBA, and so there was a little bit of an aura around them. It was also around the time when basketball gear was fashion. So the big Reeboks, the Reeboks with the straps, and in the song, and that was on billboards. So the billboards for fashion had basketball on them. it was also at a time when if you wanted to watch an NBA game or an American college game on TV, what you had to do was ring or write a letter to your friend in the US and say, can you send me a beta tape, get it converted to VHS in Australia, and then 3 months later you all sit in a room with your friends and watch it. And so you didn't have access to American television and American sport. And so because of that, the only sport that you could consume live or even on TV was Australian sport. And I think that's something that gets missed a lot now, that we can get our NBA League Pass or watch any game of any sport right around the world, and you couldn't do that before. So Australian basketball was the best simply because it was the only one that people could consume. And so I think all those factors came together to really put to put a real focus on basketball. And it was on TV. Channel 10 did a landmark deal to televise the sport, and again it started in WA. And it all went from there, and it was just one of those things. It's kind of like a yo-yo craze where it sort of went. It had been bubbling away for many years, and so many people over a long period of time had done so much work to build the game, and it reached a tipping point and it exploded. And it was very exciting to be part of. It really was amazing, and it's an area obviously in my life that I'll never forget, and the people that I was with at that time. In fact, I was looking at Paul Kuiper was one of my teammates on that team, and I was actually pulled out an old photo the other day at Paul's wedding, and myself and Glenn Ellis were in the bridal party, and it's got the whole team on this photo, and I need to get it out and post it on social media so people can have a look at it. But it's quite a photo, and it has a lot of wonderful memories.
I can still just about remember the words to the Perth Wildcats rap, actually, which if you haven't checked it out, everyone should do that.
Every so often my kids bring that up about once a year.
It's brilliant. So this Wildcats experience, when does that end, or how does that...
So at the end of 1989, I could sort of see the writing on the wall. I was sort of 10, 11, 12 on the bench, and I just figured that my time had come in the NBL. And so I had, at that time, I'd been at Institute of Sport. I'd met a guy called Charlie Fancutt who became partners with Paul McNamee and Pat Cash in starting the Hopman Cup in Perth. And so Charlie said to me, I'd finished, I actually went back to Perth and did a teaching degree, and at the end of that Charlie said to me, look, why don't you come and work for us at this thing called the Hopman Cup? We're just starting it off. And so I did sort of everything from, I was helping to write the program. I did all sorts of things, getting uniforms together, dealing with a whole range of people, ended up doing a lot of media work, on-court announcing, introducing players, all sorts of things for the first couple of years of the Hopman Cup. And so that was really my first exposure into the business of sport, and learning from people like Paul and Charlie was incredible. They were both really recently out of tennis themselves. Pat wasn't involved so much. But they were amazing. They had a real attitude of just being able to go out there and do it, and I learned so much. And they trusted me to get involved, and it was a lot of fun. And so I did that, and at the end of the first year, Charlie had been at the Institute with me, and he was a pretty good tennis player, Charlie. His claim to fame was that he beat Ivan Lendl when Lendl was number one in the world in I think a tournament in Japan, and which got world headlines. And so he was a pretty talented tennis player. And interestingly, his family, his mum and dad, and him and his brothers have all played at Wimbledon. I think the only family in the world to have done that. So that's pretty interesting family. And so these things all come to you through basketball. And so this is stuff that you just never would have exposure to if it wasn't for basketball. And so then Charlie had wanted, he was a promoter, so he was, promoting tennis, and he thought, well, I'd like to get into basketball, and so he talked me into it, going into business with him and setting up a team in the State Basketball League in Kalgoorlie.
The Goldfields.
The Goldfields. So that was my... that was sort of my Will Ferrell moment where I kind of jumped out and into semi-pro, and I've watched that movie quite a few times, and I think when I was in Kalgoorlie, the only thing I didn't do was fight the lion.
Well, Goldfield Giants, they were a bit of a success story. They've been quite successful. When I was dealing with Wobble and WA Basketball League, and I first heard of this team in Kalgoorlie, I thought, geez, there's got to be a bunch of hacks up there. Like, surely it's just a token team. But they're usually quite competitive with it all. What was it like setting up a team in Cal? Because, you know, lots of minors, lots of people that you wouldn't usually perhaps associate with following basketball.
Yeah, look, it was really interesting. We went up there, and I was the team manager. I was the coach. I remember sort of getting up there on the sort of second day I was there. We took training in the old Kalgoorlie gym, and there's a lady who was a great help to me, Karen Scruth, who's still there. And she did an amazing job. So we were actually in partnership with the Kalgoorlie Basketball Association. And we set up the team. So we went in. We actually physically built the courtside boxes. You know, there was all the players were doing that.
Players.
Players were helping to make the boxes. We had the players' wives and girlfriends were serving food. It was we were driving our own bus. So we'd go on these long road trips down to Perth, which is 6 to 7 hours in a bus, and we would drive the bus. And it was quite an amazing year. And one of my more interesting stories for me is that I was selling sponsorship, so I had to go out and sell all the sponsorship with the team. And Charlie had done some work in Perth with the Perth Mint, who had their head office in Kalgoorlie, and they were called Australian Gold Corporation at that time. And so I had to sell them the sponsorship, my now wife was the sponsorship manager, so I had to sell her the sponsorship of the team, and so I just sort of put an extra clause in the contract. And
you must have done a very good job to get
so
you in there as well.
we still have a bit of a laugh about that. But it was great. We had the town really got behind it. Kalgoorlie's a very transient place, and so there's a lot of young people, nothing to do on a Friday or Saturday night. We would pack the stands. People would be we were selling out the games. We didn't win that much, but people had a great night, and then we would sort of we'd be on the back page of the local newspaper, and again it was sort of a sort of mini celebrity status in Kalgoorlie. And we had we recruited 2 American players, a guy called Doc Earl, who to the best of my knowledge is still living in Kalgoorlie, certainly was a couple of years ago, and this is 25 years ago at least. And another guy called Paul Graham, or Snoopy Graham, and Snoopy only ever played 10 games for us. He'd come out of Philadelphia, and I can't remember the reason, but he was sort of had aspirations for the NBA but hadn't made it. And so we said to him, look, come to Australia, you can leave whenever you want, but just come and experience something. And so he came out and played, and he averaged 45 points a game, and his last game he got 82. Which is actually no, not quite. He was a long way in front of me, and him and Dan Hunt in WA still hold the record, as far as I know, for most points in a game of 82. Wow. And Snoopy went back to the NBA and played for 6 years for the Atlanta Hawks. And so I always say that I coached him into the NBA.
You got him in. Yeah, brilliant. So throughout this period, I've noticed that you don't say no. You're quite open to, let's give rowing a crack. You mentioned you were a referee, you did some coaching, you sort of don't mind wearing different hats. Sure, I can be a promoter, sure, I can be a courtside announcer. What's your view on that? Because, you see, especially now, a lot of people sort of specialise in those sorts of things.
Look, it's a good question, and people often ask me for advice, and I always say, when I've given the advice, I always say, this advice is for me, is for you if I was standing in your shoes, but you're standing in your shoes, so you need to take my advice and sort of, marry it up against the other, what you know about yourself and the information. I think for me, one of my kind of core skill sets is being able to build trust quickly with people. And one of my faults actually is taking on too much, so I tend to say it is. I'm not sure if it's a difficulty in saying no or just excitement about seeing new things. And so I'm a creator. I like to establish and create things, and what I need is someone coming along behind me to pick up the pieces. And so we were talking before about setting up this, and I've now got a fabulous executive assistant who does all of, manages my diary, manages most of my email. I really don't have to think about a lot of those things, and that's been a massive help. So I've realised, as you get older, you realise these things, what you're good at, and so I do look for new opportunities and sort of now try and filter them and sort of filter out the ones that, based on my experience, are not going to be as good for me. But I also believe that you have to investigate things, and you have to look at things. And so if I was giving advice to people, I would say understand what your strengths are, and try and marry that up with your strengths, your passions, and what you're good at. And then is there value in that? So it's no good being good at something and passionate about something if you can't make a dollar from it. I'm a capitalist at heart. I believe that the world goes around because money is made and value is generated, and so you can only fund good causes if you've got money to put into it. You can only have that money if you're good at generating it in the first place. So I do believe that people have to think very in a very focused way and a very pragmatic way on what they're going to do. And so my advice to people is, sport and entertainment is a fantastic area to get into, but understand what your value proposition is going to be when you go into it. And I think that, I've been able to do that for myself, but I think it's different for everybody. I've seen some people that are unbelievably focused on just one very narrow area and done incredibly well. And I sometimes wish that I had that skill, but I've realised that I don't. And you can't force yourself to be like that. I'm a big believer in developing your strengths, not trying to make up for your weaknesses. So a lot of people say, well, make your weaknesses... make your weaknesses better so that you're even. I say no, make your strengths better so you're awesome. At one or two things. And the world doesn't look to the guy who's sitting at the bottom of the mountain. They look to the guy who's sitting at the top of the mountain, and that person at the top of the mountain is generally good at one or two things, not 20 things. It's very rare that you can find someone who's good at lots of things. My sporting hero is Arnold Schwarzenegger, and one of the reasons is he is good at, he's been able to turn his hand to so many different things, but he's got focus on the thing that he's doing at the time, that he's doing it, and then he's moved on and used that as a building block to the next thing. And that's a really important skill.
Is that something that you got from childhood effectively? Because it sounds like that's when it started. Was that through your parents, or is that just through your own learnings, do you think?
Probably just my own learnings. I read a lot. I've spent quite a lot of money over the years on sort of my own education outside, traditional education. I've been through university. I did a teaching degree. I've got an MBA. I've done that, but I've also spent a lot of time and effort on understanding myself and educating myself. I've been to courses and read books and been to seminars and all these sort of things with the view to just trying to learn how the world really works. And I think that once you learn how the world works, then you can find your place in it. And so often people think they know what it's like, but you've actually got to really dig under the surface. And again, that's why basketball's been so incredible to me. I have met people that you would just, if it wasn't for basketball, have just taught me so much about about the world, and just stuff that you would never learn or know or understand. And that's all come about through sport.
It's an amazing vehicle sometimes.
It really is.
So getting back with my lack of focus, getting back to the Goldfields experience. So you do that for several years, just sticking with the timelines. But obviously that comes to an end, or
I stayed there for a year, and after a year I was sort of burned out. I'd worked pretty hard at it, and Hillary wanted to leave Kalgoorlie, and so we decided to go back to Perth. And I did a couple of things. I was involved in, I actually did a stint of teaching for about 3 months, just to sort of tide me over. And I worked I worked in the WA Health Department for a couple of years. I was working on with the Quit campaign. And in a strange twist, I guess, my uncle, my mother's brother, was one of the campaigners, the early campaigners in WA in the anti-smoking area. So it was kind of coincidental that I worked in the Quit campaign for the health department, but it was sort of a nice connection for me. And then I left that, and I was fortunate to still have some connections in basketball, and ended up working as the marketing manager for the Wildcats, and had done that for a couple of years. And we signed Coca-Cola as our naming rights sponsor, and I had a sort of a big part to play in that, which I'm still quite proud of. We did it was the biggest sort of sponsorship deal in basketball in Australia at the time. And then the CEO left, and I was sort of appointed as the CEO, and so I took over and ran the team that I'd sort of sat on the bench for.
So, do you mind if we focus on that Coca-Cola deal?
Not at all.
So how did that come about? What do you think allowed that to happen? And do you mind giving us some details?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, look, it's interesting. I think that, I like to I've referred to sponsors, but I really like to call them partners. And particularly now, you have to have a partnership with people, and you really have to understand why what are they trying to, why are they in business? What are they trying to achieve? And you have to understand that. And I think at that time, we had a pretty good working relationship with Coke in WA. They again, times were significantly different to they are now. So they, Coke was certainly didn't have as much competition as they have now, but was very focused on trying to build their profile, both through direct brand exposure, but also through connection to different sports, and also I think at the time to be a good citizen. And so over a period of probably a couple of months, our previous sponsor had been the Swan Brewery. They'd indicated that they were going to sort of move on, and we said to Coke in a couple of meetings, look, we're open to a partnership. Is this something that you would investigate? So it wasn't a sort of a pitch; it was just a conversation like we're having now. What do you think? Is this something that is of interest? What are you guys trying to achieve? Do you think that you could get some money from your national marketing budget to support this? What are some of the things that we could do to make it happen? And about 3 weeks before we made the pitch, Vern Reid, who was my boss at the time, the CEO, went on leave, and so we had to put the pitch together. And so I worked with a couple of guys. Kerry Stokes owned the team at that time, and I worked with a couple of people in Kerry's office who were just fabulous. And and again, this stuff's old school now, but we put together a video clip where we actually superimposed the logos onto the court. Which might seem really daggy now, but it was a big deal back then. And we had the video, and we had a training court. We blacked out the training court, and so we had it sort of choreographed so that we met in a sort of a meeting room or a training room beforehand. We brought them onto the court, and they had 2 giant Coke cans which we had spotlit, and everything else was black, and so they sort of walked in, and so it created theatre. And so they knew from that moment to expect something good. And I think it sort of set the expectation also that we were going to ask for a lot of money. Which
which you did.
Which was also important. And then we had a really good presentation. Kerry was in the meeting, Kerry Stokes, and that was important because, as he is today, he was a pretty important guy.
Carry some weight.
And to have him in the room was a bit of a coup, and showed, I think, that the fact that we were very serious about what we were doing. And then we went through. We had a good presentation. And we went through and we'd done all our homework. We knew exactly what they wanted. We had a really good video. We had some bells and whistles, I call them, some sort of sexy things that they probably weren't expecting. And a proposal, and said, go away and think about it, and which they did, and we sort of went backwards and forwards on the price a little bit, and they wanted some things that we hadn't included, and we negotiated over that, and they said yes, which was a great day, and Kerry wrote me a really nice letter afterwards, which I've still got. And Malcolm Gibbons was the CEO at the time, and I still keep in touch with Malcolm to this day. And it was good. And it turned out to be a great partnership. We won the championship. This the first year. Coke was a sponsor, so
it worked well.
It was hard to top that.
So, can I ask the Don Draper of Perth Wildcats, how much was that deal worth? Or
look, it was about $500,000 a year over 5 years. So it was a pretty substantial pretty substantial sponsorship,
Yeah.
and there was also some in kind. So in addition to that, each of the players or each of the key players had a Coke can with their image on it.
Yeah.
So you could buy a James Crawford Coke can or an Andrew Vlahoff Coke can. The Coke logo was actually integrated into the Wildcats logo.
Yes.
And again, that was a bit of a coup. No one had done that before. And the idea was that when it was shown in the media, it had to have Coke in it. But of course, they just sort of pulled the Coke logo out. But that was fine.
Yeah.
It was a big deal.
Yeah. So obviously you did a great job, because then you graduated into CEO role. How old were you when
I
this
was probably
happening?
in my, probably early 30s, I suppose, 32, 33.
Yeah.
Look, I was just, as I said, I think that I was pretty passionate. I felt I had something to offer, but I was good at building relationships. I think I had, the trust of a lot of people, what I lacked in knowledge, I probably made up for in enthusiasm. And I think people thought that I was very genuine, and I think that's helped me a lot, over the years.
Yeah. So what was that initial experience like as a CEO of a national?
Look, it was pretty scary. Because you just, it's like everything. Each sort of,
Kerry Stokes is your boss as well at that stage as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I remember the first meeting I had going into Kerry's office, and a big beautiful wood panelled office, and Kerry sitting there behind his desk and hammering me about something, and it was a bit of a moment.
Yeah.
You can't. It's very difficult, and it's a little bit the same as I've become the chairman of Basketball Australia and other roles that I've had. You can't teach that stuff until you're actually in the. You can prepare for it, but you can't teach it. I think. Well, that's my own experience.
Yeah.
You don't understand what it's like until you actually get in there, and so that's why. In fact, we had a discussion just a few days ago in relation to coaching and why we feel within Basketball Australia is probably important for the coaching cycle to start after an Olympics is ended, and not after a World Championship, because you've got then the new coach has got a World Championship and then an Olympics, and so they sort of can build up to the Olympic experience, which for in basketball in Australia there's no greater honour than representing your country in the Olympics, and of course we've got the NBA and the WNBA, and there's great honour in that, but I think a lot of Australians see the Olympics as being the pinnacle. And so it's about preparation, and so I was sort of prepared, but really at a relatively young age, I didn't really have any management experience. I hadn't really managed anyone. And I've looked back, I think, wow, I really didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
But you learn, you just sort of, you just have to sort of be willing to make decisions and get on with things, and you have to assume control. And as someone, a few years ago, I went mountain bike riding with a group of guys, and we were just about to head off, and this guy sort of rolls up on he looked like he knew what he was doing on his bike, and we went on this amazing ride, and it's the most tired and worn out I've ever been after doing anything physical in my life. And anyway, this guy had sort of ridden across these really tough areas where the roots of the trees were sort of sloping down, and they were all wet and slime in it, and you'd think the bike would just slide away, and he was just able to go across it. And I said to him afterwards, how did you do that? And he said, and these words have always stuck with me, he said, you've just got to power through it. And I think those words really meant a lot to me. And basically what he was saying was, in a tough situation, you've just got to power through it. You've just got to get it done. You've just got to find a way to do it and to get to the other side. And to me, in a lot of situations, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
You've just got to find a way to get through whatever that is, get to the other side. And so I now, I suppose one of the things that helps me think about the work that I do is that I've got an inner confidence that will be able to power through something and get to the other side. I don't know how I'll do it, but I've got a confidence that I can. And that's just something that you build up over time.
Yeah.
And so that was a great lesson.
Yeah, I bet it was a good learning curve over that period of time.
Yeah.
So how long's your tenure last with the Wildcats? And
3.
are you starting to get board positions?
Look, I was on the board of Basketball WA, but that was sort of really because I was the CEO of both the Wildcats and the Breakers, the WNBL team at the time. And so I wasn't sort of aspiring to those board positions. They sort of had come about, and so that was about 3 years. And Kerry was just at the point where he was sort of, probably at the end of his tenure with the Wildcats, and Luke Longley and Andrew Vlahoff were looking to take it over. And again, I just felt my use by date was coming, and so I was a bit. I wanted some other life experience, and so I decided to that I wanted to go and live somewhere different. So. I was actually in Melbourne, and my wife Hillary saw an ad for a role in which turned out to be the CEO of the Adelaide Zebras soccer club.
Oh, right.
So I did that for 6 months, and that was probably a bit of a disappointing experience, I think, for me and for them. It was we just had different expectations about what was going to happen. The first 3 months, I think we loved each other. The second 3 months, we hated each other. And then I left and became, in sort of early 2000, to become the CEO of Victoria Titans.
So do you think that was part of not knowing the sport or not knowing the environment? Because it's a bit of a different community or environment, I find, anyway, with different sports. Yeah,
look, it was. I think that's true. I did feel a bit out of touch in football, soccer or football. It was a great sport. They were great people, but it wasn't my thing. I didn't have the same depth of knowledge about the sport. I didn't know the people in the same way, and I think that's true. And it just wasn't for me. It was if I look back, it was a bad decision. It was a poor decision of mine. I should never have taken that role. But it was a learn.
You got to listen to your wife.
Yeah, right? That's right. So. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's right. She said, "Oh, you should think about this," and so. So I ended up doing it.
So you then moved from Adelaide back to Melbourne. The Titans getting started.
Yeah, so that'd been a merger between North Melbourne Giants and South East Melbourne Magic, and so at the time I went there, they sort of had merged both the teams and the sort of the management structure. So there was sort of things like 2 marketing managers, 2 accountants, I don't think there were 2 CEOs by the time I got there, but it was that sort of, so it was still merging, and the 2 organisations that really hated each other previously were sort of coming together, and so that was again probably I had more experience, but it was a bit of a tougher gig.
So I find that a really fascinating space, because there's not many examples of mergers happening with sports. Quite often there's and I don't really know the full story, obviously. Hopefully you can illustrate some of it, but usually it's a weaker team going up to a stronger team, like South Melbourne with the Sydney Swans. Obviously they move and effectively they become the Sydney Swans, whereas the Titans felt like it was 2 teams. They didn't sort of merge under the Giants or anything like that, and they were good teams in their own right. They had great history.
Yeah, that's
D-Mac
right.
and Scott Fisher played for the Giants and so on and so forth. So how did that come about? Or obviously you were sort of tagged in sort of to tie it together.
Yeah, look, I think they were looking for someone, and because of the experience I'd had in Perth, I think they were, that had helped me. And look, it was really hard. The organisations on the court were sort of totally different cultures. You had sort of Brett Brown leading North Melbourne, who were all about the team and working together, and Brian Gorgiam was, let's take on the world and everyone's against us, and those 2 things came together, and they had, probably hate is the wrong word, but they'd certainly had some pretty difficult spars on court, but the organisations were quite different as well. One probably had a more disciplined organisation, one was a bit looser, one had more resource behind it, and so there was a whole range of reasons they came together. It wasn't just about making a stronger team, it was about making the organisation stronger as well. And I think that merge, I had come in probably a year after it started, so I'd avoided a lot of the real heat, but there was still the machinations of all the things that had gone before, so that was always going to be pretty tough, and that team ultimately folded because it was, again, private investors, a number of sort of private investors who were putting their money in, and there were some disagreements there as well, and they were, again, great people, very much had their heart in the right spot, and then again, if I look back, I probably wasn't that well prepared to to take that on, and certainly if I was doing it now, I'd do it quite differently, I think. But that's
what sort of things would you do differently? Do you think?
I wasn't great at bringing. I didn't do a good enough job of bringing everybody onto the same page. I probably wasn't open enough with the board about what I felt they needed to do as a board and how they needed to work together. The team trained in sort of one location that was very distant from the office. So it was the Wildcats. We're all in one spot. All the office staff and all the players saw each other every day. There was a real connection. There was a real disconnection. Things like that just didn't work, and I should have been stronger. I felt like I should have been stronger in taking the lead and making things happen.
Yeah. So it's from afar, it was really interesting watching the Melbourne basketball or Victorian basketball environment from an NBL perspective, mergers and from when I started following basketball in the mid '80s through to now. There's been all these mergers and acquisitions and what have you throughout the time, and it just from an afar looked quite dysfunctional. And as I just thought of the fans. I was like, well, if you're a Mad Giants fans and now you have to be a Titans fan, and now they're defunct. Like, how hard is it to sort of bring the fans along?
Look, it's very hard, and I think that's one of the things that's hurt basketball over the years is the fact that we haven't. I often say, if you look at, particularly in Australia, at football and Aussie rules and cricket, they play at generally a council-owned ground. A local municipality owns the ground and pays for the ground. The clubs don't own it. They don't have to pay for it. The council will maintain it. There's a nice club room there. They can go and put all their trophies and pictures in there. Cricket has it one season, football has it the next, and they have a home. And it's a place where everybody in the club feels like, this is the home of this club. Basketball doesn't really have that at an association level. All the clubs and teams will come in, but they don't have a club room. They just come and play at a stadium and then they leave again. So there's none of that. You don't have that place. And I think that's hurt us a bit. Basketball generally also has supported itself. So while a council may invest in the venue, sometimes the council or others will own the venue and basketball leases it. But even in the cases where basketball has some either ownership or part ownership, the onus is on the basketball organisation for the upkeep, to make sure that it's maintained, to do any extensions or developments. And so it's a little bit of an uneven playing field there. And again, that's just the way that it's been. I guess basketball's always been able to do that. So I do think that has carried on when you've got instability in terms of the teams at the national level. That definitely hurt us, and I think now, with the NBL and the WNBL, we've got much more stability. Larry Kesselman and his group with the NBL is doing an incredible job of building stability, and I know that he's very focused on trying to build really strong organisations behind the clubs so that there is that stability in the longer term. And I think that's really important, because then that builds, if you look at the strong teams now, particularly say the Wildcats in Perth, the Wildcats are strong because they've been there for 35 years, and people know it's the Perth Wildcats and it's got history. Kids my age now have kids themselves that are getting carted along to the basketball as well. It is quite great to watch. So after the Titans, where do you move on to? So I sort of went and got involved in a couple of business ventures. I invested in an aged care business. I bought a self-storage business, and I also worked with Mark Cowan, who ended up starting the Dragons, Southeast Melbourne Dragons, or the Southern Dragons, South Dragons. And I worked in the design business, so I sort of, again, just made a bit of a chameleon move into a different area. But again, it was, all sort of marketing related. And again, it was my ability to build relationships with people. I knew I was, intelligent enough to be able to learn fairly quickly on the job. So again, if I look into that business, I can remember the first couple of jobs I did in there. I thought, wow, how do I survive? But I just adapted. I'm reasonably good at learning quickly, and I can learn sort of 80% of something very, very quickly. But to be an expert, you have to learn 99%. But I sort of was able to get through by knowing enough and having the ability to sort of build trust with people. Yeah. So just going back to those business investments, just touching on them, because aged care versus storage, marketing, and you've obviously still had a toe in sport.
I know you said they're all marketing, but I think they're quite different. So when you're looking at some of these businesses and how they run, and presumably you're having your 2 cents as to your say as to what you think should be happening in them. What do you look at when you look at other organisations and businesses?
Well, there's a few things. I think generally, and so, my thinking has evolved obviously over a period of time. But now, if I look outside of sport, I mean, sport's totally in a different category. But if I look outside of sport, the sort of businesses that I like are businesses where there's something to rent. So, where there's a renewable, a recurring income all of the time, where you don't have to go out and redo the same, redo the work every time to make a sale. You can just, selling essentially the same. So storage is a great example of that. There's a storage facility. People put their stuff in there. They'll generally leave it there for anywhere from a few months to a few years, and they just pay for that space. And so that's a very simple business to run once you've got it, set up and operating. A little bit the same with aged care. I mean, obviously there's a lot of care and attention needed in aged care, but essentially you've got a recurring model where you're looking after people and you're delivering a product on an ongoing basis. And look, I haven't design or the branding business is just about the polar opposite of that. You've got to reinvent the wheel every single project, and so that's a lot more, and that's probably part of what formed my view about this stuff. And that's not to say that you shouldn't get involved with them. That's just about the balance and understanding what ladder you're leaning what wall you're leaning your ladder against, and so that would be one thing. And then the other thing is people. Do you trust the people? To me, the biggest factor in business and in life in the world at the moment, and I think it'll only increase in importance, is trust. If you don't trust people, you've got nothing. And trust comes in many facets. It's about, where do you buy your coffee? If you're walking down the street and you go, which coffee shop you go into, it's the one that you feel like is going to give you the best coffee. And there's no mechanism to determine that. You look at it and you go, oh, well, I've been in coffee shops where I've seen that particular type of thing before and that's been bad coffee, so therefore I won't go there. It can be as subjective as that, or as objective as going, oh, I know that this brand of coffee always makes good coffee, so I'll go there. And it's a bit the same with businesses and people. You just have, over a period of time, you can generally, I think, you can sense out someone pretty quickly. And my view is I will always trust someone until they give me a reason not to. And I've been burned a few times because of that. But generally, I think it's been something that stood well.
Yeah. So throughout this time, you're on various boards, as you've sort of touched on. Did you have some formal training around those board positions? Like, we see the Australian Institute of Company Directors running various courses, and there's a few others that run director courses for non-profits and sports groups and what have you. What was your learning curve like for being a director? Because it's a bit of difference.
Yeah, look, there is. So I haven't done the company directors course, and I need to. It's been something that's been on my sort of, I won't say it's on my bucket list, but it's on my list. Because I think that training is important. So I'm a big believer in education. I'm not necessarily a believer in formal education. I think that there's a lot of different ways to be educated in the world. I don't think you have to do a specific course and get a certificate at the end to learn. And if you look around the world, some of the most successful people are people who have, they're very well educated, but not necessarily in what we would call the traditional way. But I do think that's a course that I would like to do it. And I'm a big believer in strong governance. And I think part of strong governance is having people who understand the rules. And so I think I do understand them.
Yeah.
But I also think I've probably got a gap, and it's what I don't know that I'm worried about. And on our Basketball Australia board, I'm very fortunate because I'm surrounded by a couple of lawyers who are very good at that.
Yeah.
But there's no question I need to do that. But in terms of training, just again, probably another one of my strengths is just the ability to pick things up quickly. So I can, I'm very good in recently, as you would know, we had this incident in the Philippines with the sort of the blow up over there. And I'm pretty good in those situations because I'm not, those things sort of don't faze me. I'm able to sort of take everything in and then relatively quickly make decisions. So if you had shown me all the video of that and then given me a week to work out what to do, my decisions wouldn't have been any better because I would have wasted the time thinking about something else. I was just able to quite quickly determine, okay, we should do these things, and fortunately it worked out. And it could have as it turned out, it went as well as I think it could.
Yeah.
But I was just fortunate to be able to be to be able to sort of handle that situation quite quickly. So again, I think the thing where I'm not as good on a board is I don't go into the detail sometimes, and I think that's where I need others around me. I'm very good at seeing the big picture and looking over the top and sort of being able to move the pieces. I'm not so good at being able to deliver on the absolute detail of things, particularly from a legal and probably a financial perspective, as well as going into the absolute detail of something.
Yeah. So that's what I see in sport generally, trying to attract, and in business, trying to attract really great directors as well as CEOs and general managers or what have you, is really hard. And trying to find directors from a broad range of thinking, not just formal education, but broader education, is really, really difficult. How do you think, like thinking about all the different board roles that you've had from Goldfields through to WA Basketball, Perth Wildcats, Victorian Basketball Australia now, there's obviously a myriad of people. How do you think sport especially, but all organisations, could improve the way that they're looking for board members or assigning board members? Because I'm sure there's some improvements somewhere.
Yeah, I think that often what happens is people make the assumption that people won't do it because they've sort of got a role that's bigger than the board role, and they'd sort of look down on it and wouldn't do it. And a good recent example of that for me was in our Basketball Australia board was our appointment of Ian Silk, who's the CEO of Australian Super. So he's arguably one of Australia's top CEOs, and someone that I would never have imagined would have wanted to join our board. But one of our other directors knew him very well, did work with him, and he, as it turned out, Ian had a sort of a history in basketball, had played a little bit himself, was involved through his children, and was delighted to be on board, and has been an incredibly good director, amazing. And so I think it's a case of identifying and sort of talking to the right people, and looking outside the sort of what I'd call the often at a community level you sort of pick the people around, so that whoever is the parent of the kid that seems to be the smartest one in the group is the one you go, oh, let's go and get that person. I think to be a successful board you have to be a bit better than that. I think you have to go and look at yet you have to go and sort of hand pick people, and you have to put a professional proposition to them about the way that your governance works, the way that what they're going to get out of it, the way that you conduct meetings, and what your aspirations are. So it's a little bit about painting the picture. And so people want to be involved in a business that's going somewhere and doing something and going to make a difference in the world. That's my view. And so every organisation has got the opportunity to make a difference. They can just do it in a different way. So being able to paint that picture and live up to that aspiration is what you need to do, and then you find the people to help you get there. So
some of these board members that you've spoken about, two of them, you speak quite highly of them. What do you see in them that go, wow, this guy or girl, lady is switched on, this is who I want around me on this board?
I think there's a few things. The one is passion. They have to be passionate, and they have to be committed. They have to be wanting to make a difference, not just very much not there for the sake of being able to say, oh, I'm on a state board of a major sport or a national board. That's you have to be very wary of that. And I think generally in basketball we've got, at both a national and a state level, and many associations as well, great people who are very, very committed. They're very good at what they do in their lives outside of basketball, and I'm a believer that you don't want too much of your sport, people of too much expertise. So a person that's an expert around sport. So on our board at the moment, I would arguably, with one other board member, be the person who knows the most about the sport and has had the most involvement in the sport. But I would consider myself to be a business person first and a basketball person second. And they're so much better at me than lots of other things. So, I've identified a very small area that I'm good at, and I know that I'm not going to compete in the other areas. So find people to fill those gaps around you, where they can have their input. So if I'm trying to sort of step into their area all the time and say, well, no, in the legal area, no, I don't think you should do this, you need to come back to me. Yeah. No, give the authority and responsibility to someone else to lead that area and allow them to be able to, because no one wants someone standing over the top of them all the time telling them what to do. And look, I do have a tendency to do that, so I have to be very conscious of sort of pulling back. But again, just commitment, skill, and passion. I think are really it's a bit cliched, but it's really true.
I suppose there's also cross-pollination of ideas and backgrounds as well that ultimately become your strengths. We talk about that with entrepreneurship, with starting businesses. Is you talking to me, sport and IT sort of thing come together and new ideas form. I'm a big advocate of cross-pollinating ideas and experiences in amongst sports as well, having refereed basketball at a national level and then going off and umpiring football. It's chalk and cheese, and you wonder, why don't AFL take some ideas from basketball as to how to handle players or what have you, and that extrapolates that to all areas of sport and what have you. Do you think more can be done around that sort of cross-pollinating, not just at a board level, but we often seen the coach, and not dissimilar to your own path, stick with the one sport.
Look, I don't think it's so much about the sort of coaches changing or necessarily even administrators. I do believe that the sports industry in Australia needs to do a better job of having an industry focus. So, we in basketball often, we think that sport is basketball. Well, no, sport is sport. So, and I think that the Sports Commission and the Australian Olympic Committee are doing a really good job of this, and I think that's why it's fantastic that Kate Palmer's come on board as the CEO of the Sports Commission, because she does have a view across all the sports, and she's really thinking around how can we make sport better. And I don't think it's not that hasn't been done before, but I just think having a real focus on that is very, very important. Like, the rising tide lifts all boats, and that's very much my view in basketball. The fact that the NBL is going really well, or 3-on-3 is going really well, or wheelchair basketball is going, or the NBA, the fact that any of those that's good for everybody in the sport. And I think the same of sport. When one sport does well, that should be good for all sport because it tells a great story. And then likewise, when there's a bad, unfortunately, the effect of our the situation in the Philippines, it doesn't just affect basketball, it affects sport, in a good way or a bad way, depending on the situation. And so I think that that cross-pollination is through everybody in the sport recognising that we're in sport first and then our own individual, we're in industry first, then our sport second. And I think that's an important mindset for people.
So, sticking on basketball and some of the challenges around Basketball Australia, there's some pretty well documented ones around NBL and separation of powers, shall we say, between those sorts of leagues, and then you've got state leagues, eastern state leagues. How is that all working? And obviously you touched on Larry and the way that he's sort of encouraging the NBL to really flourish now. How's that tracking?
Look, I think it's tracking pretty well. I mean, as with anything, you can always do better, and we're always looking to do better. But I think generally I would say that basketball is in pretty good shape. And I often say that the strength of basketball is actually at the grassroots. It's in the clubs and associations where, you've got people in clubs and associations that, I can think of a few people, I won't name them here, but I could, who have been in associations coaching under 14 girls for 20 years or 25 years, and they are the best under 14 girls coaches probably in the world, and they're the reason we're so strong is because those people have been one, willing, and second, given the opportunity to stay at that level and do such an incredibly good job at that at that level of sport. And so our development really comes through the the grassroots and the associations, and our associations are as strong as any structure anywhere in the world. I really genuinely believe that, and the job of Basketball Australia and our states is to support their growth and development. And obviously we have a role to promote our national teams, our elite performance pathway, and also game development, growing the game. And so those two things are really really important. And then of course we've got our leagues that sort of form part of that pathway. So I think that we're lucky that we've got strength at at the bottom. The roots of the tree are really strong.
Yeah, and obviously at the top end, well, I'd say the top end, you've got guys like Ben Simmons and all the NBA guys starting to do well, and number one picks, and potentially, hopefully, contending for championships over the next few years. How does that influence or pull along? Obviously, we spoke about it at the very start with beta tapes being posted, and it's a much different world now with, as you said, League Pass. And
look, it's very important. I mean, having those people at the sort of the pinnacle for people to look up to is just incredibly important. And that's been the work. I'm fortunate to be the chair of this organisation at the moment when everything's sort of going in the right direction, but there's been a lot of hard work by a lot of people over 20. This hasn't just happened in the last couple of years. This has happened over the last 30 years in Australia, where people who have been working at an association level, state level, national level, coaching teams, developing players, supporting referees, supporting score table officials. I often give the example of at the state league club in WA where I played Perry Lakes Hawks for many years. The ladies who ran that score bench have been doing it for years and years, and they are an intimate part of the basketball family in Australia. So critical, to our growth. And so should Australia win gold medals at the Olympics, they will absolutely be part of that success. That's really, really critical, and I think we need to really need to recognise that, because success doesn't just come from the 12 players on the court and the coach. It comes from the whole structure underneath the sport. And we're so fortunate in Australia to have very such a strong structure in that regard. And even things like I heard this morning. I was playing in my Tuesday morning pickup group down at MSAC, and someone told me that Matthew Dellavedova had been down at Maryborough yesterday and run a clinic for 150 local kids. Didn't tell anyone. Went in and gave them all a basketball and a t-shirt and just ran a clinic for them. I mean, money can't buy that. That's incredible. What an amazing system when you've got someone who's had that level of success that can come back in and do something like that. I just it's incredible, amazing, like really, really incredible. And that's why people look to Australia and go, why are we successful on the world stage? Well, there's thousands of reasons, and those are some of them. The score bench, officials in Perth, Delhi doing his thing, the under 14 coaches, all these people over literally the years and years and years, all doing their thing to where they've risen the tide. Larry coming in, Kerry Stokes investing in the team, Bob Williams, the people who've invested in the Bullets and the Kings and all these, the guys that were involved in the Titans when I came to Melbourne. All these people have all done their piece to rise the tide of the sport.
So so what does the next 5 years or so look like for basketball?
Well, I think it's pretty exciting. As you know, we've got Team USA coming out to Melbourne next year to play two games, 22nd and 24th of August, and that'll be an amazing, really quite incredible couple of events. Hopefully, the World Cup in China next year, we should qualify for that. We've got more qualifier games coming up through the FIBA World Cup qualifier system. Players in the NBA, the WNBA, our NBL and WNBL teams being successful, our national wheelchair basketball leagues. I think we've got the number changes. I heard Anthony Moore, our CEO, telling me that I think that there was 18 national teams that we had. I thought we had 14, but we've got underage teams, we've got our intellectually disabled teams, we've got our wheelchair teams, our able-bodied teams, the Boomers and Opals. So we've got all these national teams, and all of them performing at incredible levels around the globe. And then we've got the issue of facilities. So we don't have enough facilities in Australia. I know that Dandenong Basketball Association in Melbourne turns away 500 kids a season.
Yeah.
No space, and they've got 16 courts, and they're going from 7 in the morning till 11 at night.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's unbelievable. So I think that our challenge is to make sure that we we can gather all of that together and take advantage of it. And one of the things that'll be close to your heart is around technology and making sure that that we use that effectively. The world of sport is changing, and we can't, if we're going to continue to grow, we can't do things the way that we've done them for the last 30 years. We need to keep the things that are important and think about the things that are changing and use those effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's finish on a few things. So gifting books. What sort of book do you typically hand over to someone, apart from your own, which I might add you launched mid last year?
Yeah.
Feel free to plug it if you want.
That's all right. It's look, I have given a few away of those. It's interesting. I've got one at home at the moment that I'm giving to a friend who's working for a Danish company about what's called in Denmark Hygge, which is their way of life, and so it's about sort of culture and that sort of thing. I've given often self-help books. My Hillary, my wife, sort of laughs at me for reading all these books because she's got a bit of a, she thinks you either know this stuff or you don't. But I find it really, really useful, and so often give those away just to sort of let her know that I'm passing on the love to somebody else. And often, one of the things I do is I often sort of, will give someone a little handwritten note. Because I think, again, in this day and age, 20 years ago it was really cool to get an email. Yeah. Now it's really cool to get a handwritten letter or note. Yeah. And so, that's probably the thing. But generally in a book it would be something that, practical, something to, something of self-help nature.
All right, so a few more hints then. So on your blog there's managing time. So give us some hints about how do you manage time? Because you've got all these things, you're directors everywhere. And
I'm a big believer in the 80-20 principle. So, 80% of things in the world don't really matter that much. And so, the reason carpet tiles were invented is because you only use a little bit of the floor. Yeah. And it goes down to every single facet of life. So no claim bonus on a car insurance is because most people never make a claim. The friends in your, the numbers in your phone book. If you've got 500 numbers in your phone book, you're probably ringing 20 of them all the time, and some you won't have rung for 3 years. So it's a little bit the same in business and in life. Life comes down to a few really critical things. So most people, if they look back, can look at a few really important things that changed the course of their life. For me, going to the Institute of Sport changed the course of my life. Marrying the right person changed the course of my life. Doing, getting particular roles or, and it's about identifying what those things are. And so staying, because it's so easy to, look at your phone and be on social media and respond to everything. So what I try to do is to, and look, I have to say I'm not great. I don't think I'm great at it yet, but I'm certainly working on it. So a couple of little time hacks. One of them is I use voice recorder. So I've got someone who transcribes voice messages for me. So if I need to write a letter or a long email, I'll put it into my phone when I'm, sitting around, or sometimes if I'm just waiting for a meeting or something like that, I'll just whip out my phone and say, look, here's a letter. And so rather than me type it out, because I'm a slow typer, I'll just voice it. I'll have someone write it out and edit it, send it back to me for approval, and then send it off. So I can get a lot of stuff done that way. And having a good executive assistant is just, so most of my email I don't look at. I never make an appointment in my diary. I mean, I was actually late coming here, and I actually rang Sarah to say, can you let the guys know I'm going to be late? Because I've got other things to do. And I didn't want to have to go through the process of having to be awkward on the phone and say, so I didn't want to get into the emotional turmoil because I knew that would put me off whatever I was thinking about. So it's just having those things in place is really important. So having systems and processes. Something else that someone taught me, which I won't go into detail with, but I'll give you the principle, is black time, blue time and red time. So black time is thinking or strategic time. Blue time, and so that's anything about future revenue. Blue time is anything about current revenue, and red time is administration, about no revenue. So a typical sort of small business owner, depending on the sort of the stage they're at in that spectrum, would be wanting to spend initially probably 30% on black, 65% on blue and 5% on red. And it's not to say the red doesn't get done, but they have someone else to do it very early on. And then as you have more people working and you sort of move up in the business, and so I guess in my role as chairman, what I'm trying to do is spend 85-90% of my time on black time for Basketball Australia, and not much on the doing or the generating. So I might go to a meeting where there's a sales opportunity, or a revenue opportunity, and virtually no time on admin. And so that's been helpful to me about knowing how much time I should spend on each area. But I've observed some people who are incredibly good at that. I'm aspiring to be incredibly good at it.
You and me both. So what about, just finally, people that are aspiring to be a CEO or GM or a chairperson of a national sporting body or any sort of organisation? What would you give someone like myself? I want to be on the board of Basketball Australia one day. What would your tips and hints and thoughts be?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. I heard someone say a little while ago they'd they were talking about writing their book, and they were talking to a group of people, and someone in the audience said, "Oh, look, I don't know how I'd write my book. I'm just so busy. I sort of, get up and I've got things to do during the day." And this guy said, "I wrote my book between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m." And I saw the person go, "Wow, that's that's real commitment." And it's about I think that to do anything extraordinary, you have to be very committed to doing it. A lot of people go, "Oh, I'd like to do this," or "I'd like to do that." And again, my view of the world is, if you want to do so, everything is achievable. No question at all. Everything is achievable. And I genuinely believe that. Not everything is achievable for every person. So, it's a person who is perhaps disabled in some way might find it hard to do a particular physical thing, but they might be able to do something else. But generally speaking, most people can achieve what they want to if they absolutely set their mind to it. The problem is that most people aren't that committed. They're really not that committed. So they'll say, "Oh, well, will you get it? Would you be willing to, to get out of bed at 5 a.m. every day for and go and do your exercise, and then do this specific thing?" Like the old sort of sales paradigm, when you say, if you ring 100 people a day, you're going to be successful at sales. Even if you're really crappy on the phone, if you ring 100 people, and most people will say, "Probably you're right, but I'm not willing." They may not make the direct observation they're not wanting to do it. They'll make the subconscious observation. So look, I would absolutely say commitment. Like, you have to be very committed to it, and you have to you just have to have a go. You have to just keep banging on the door and be very self-aware. Like, I think one of the great skills that people have is just looking in the mirror and being really honest with themselves, really honest. Because most of us aren't that honest with ourselves, and we go, "Oh, well, I know that this is probably the case, but maybe not." You've got to be honest. So you've got to be honest. You've got to be committed, and you have to learn. You just have to go out and learn, and see the skills that it takes to to get there. So, if I look back, I would actually say that the things that I've done, I didn't actually ever expect to become the chairman of Basketball Australia. It wasn't an aspiration that I had from being a young kid, and I'm unbelievably honoured to be in that position. But if I look back, I did do a lot of things to sort of put myself in the right position to get there, and that was bloody hard work. I've done a lot of late night meetings. I've done a lot of things that people look at. Why the hell would you do that? And so, but it was because I loved the sport, and I genuinely wanted to do it. I didn't do things that I didn't want to do, but I was very committed to it. And so I think you just have to make the commitment, have a plan for it, and just go out and get it done.
Make it happen. Thank you very much for making this happen. Really, really appreciated the conversation. I think we covered a huge range of things, and I'm sure it'll be beneficial for everyone out there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.